Welcome to the Jaipur Literary Festival, Boulder, first edition. We're sure happy that you're here. I had a panel earlier this morning where people afterwards came up and wanted to say to me how much fun they thought the panel was. And I said, well, come to my afternoon panel and see another side of me. What I'm going to do is, my three panelists are so talented. I want to introduce them so you know who they are. You're so lucky here in the Denver-Boulder area to have so much talent at hand. And these are three of your at-hand people. Dayan, at the end here, is an award-winning playwright, director, performer, producer, and theater instructor, I believe at UFC, right? And he's dedicated himself to the theater of political relevance, exploring such themes as religious fundamentalism, identity, and most recently with his play Reason, the complexities of PTSD. You know what I mean by that acronym, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Ami was born on a kibbutz in Israel. He served in the Israeli military, and then took off for Europe and New York, and before moving to Boulder in 1999. He's collaborated with just about every theater and theater group in the Denver-Boulder area, developing and refining shows here before local audiences, and then they're sent off to New York City and off-Broadway, and from there, they're performed around the globe. Helen Thorpe lives in Denver and is a freelance journalist and the author of two extraordinary nonfiction books. The first one was Just Like Us, which is an intensely topical work about immigration into the United States from the perspective of four Denver girls of Mexican ancestry. And then her most recent publication is Soldier Girls, the battles of three women at home and at war, of which the New York Times said, what Thorpe accomplishes is something far greater than describing the experience of women in the military. The book is American history and a triumph. She's written for all the important newspapers and magazines and websites in America, including The New Yorker.
All of them?
Well, what? I have to leave out Gentleman's Quarterly? She has written for all of them, yes, and plus This American Life. And last year, she even appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. I have it from a reliable source that Helen also knows where the cookies are hidden in the governor's mansion down in Denver. Right? You know where they're hidden?
I know where they're hidden.
Okay. In the middle, to Helen's right, is Laird Hunt. He lives here in Boulder and is first and foremost, at least in my mind, a brilliant novelist, although he also teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Denver, and perhaps because he studied French literature at the Sorbonne, he likes to torture himself by translating French novels into English. He's the author of a collection of short work and also 6 novels, including Neverhome, which we'll be talking about today, and the novel Kind One, which was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award in 2013, and the winner of the Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards for Fiction, which Marlon James is a Jamaican-American writer who just was given this award in Cleveland last weekend. And when I asked Marlon, James, just explain to me what exactly is the Anisfield-Wolf Book Prize, he said it's the Black Pulitzer. So we have a Black Pulitzer winner here on our panel. But that prize honors work that makes an important contribution to the understanding of racism and diversity in our culture, and it is a really huge award. Huge. Okay. Harper's Magazine sent me to cover the war in Kosovo in 1999. And I'm going to begin our discussion today by reading the opening paragraph of the piece I wrote for the magazine about that war, which was published in December 1999 on the eve of a new century and a new millennium. Here's the opening paragraph. The numbers stagger and overwhelm and thrust us far beyond weeping over the endless constellation of lives. So many, many lives brutally discontinued. 25 million men and women in uniforms slaughtered in 2 world wars. 60 million, 70 million dead civilians. Nobody really knows the count. They are uncountable. Millions more in all the other wars of our time, our century, the American century, history's bloodiest century. Surely the last to die will fall in a ditch or alley in some forsaken place, a bullet in his chest, shrapnel through her skull. On the very eve of the millennium, as the dazzling ball of the future descends in Times Square. So that was December 1999. Now here we are in the future. This is the future I was gesturing towards then, 2015. For 14 years, we have been engaged in a war on terror. It's the longest military conflict in American history. Recently in The Guardian, the Pakistani writer Mohsin Hamid, he's the author of a novel called The Reluctant Fundamentalist, he coined the term perma-war, which he believes began in 2001. Maybe so for the Pakistanis, but America has been in a permanent state of war since World War II. Generation after generation sent overseas to fight and die. If you've been watching the Republican debates, you probably noticed that the warmongering trait in the American psyche, despite our disasters in the Middle East, is alive and well and itching for new and bigger fights. Here's a quote from the wonderful essayist Rebecca Solnit. War is a stain that has sunk so deeply into the fabric of our society that it is now its ordinary coloring. We now live in war as a fish lives in water. Ours is a society of war and a society at war with itself. This is so pervasive and so accepted that it is invisible. We are a peaceful nation is a popular thing to say in the United States. Those who say this have been denied the intelligence to know what is done in their name and to decide democratically whether it should be done or not. Or, and this is the bigger truth, or an equal truth, or they have ducked it. This bellicose trait of ours, or ethos, is a paradox. Americans, despite our endless wars, despite our football games and martial Hollywood movies, despite our gun ownership, you don't really think of themselves as a warrior culture, which is how the rest of the world sees us. We are, as a whole, blithe or indifferent or indeed oblivious about the consequences of our actions on the rest of the world. In fact, if a civilian wants to piss off a veteran, all the civilian has to say to the vet is, "Where is Fallujah? Where is Helmand Province?" If a civilian wants to silence a vet forever, all the civilian has to do is to start to look bored when a veteran is trying to explain or describe to him or her what happened during the deployment. If a veteran wants to shut up a civilian who asks, "Did you kill anyone?" all the vet has to do is answer, as one vet I know chose to, "If I did kill anyone, you paid for it." With all this in mind, let me ask the first question to Ami Dayan. And it's this question: what, if anything, and I want to say after, Ami, after you finish answering, if the other panelists want to respond further, that's fine. There's no rules. No rules. But here's the question. What, if anything, is problematic about the patriotic expression of gratitude? Thank you for your service.
Thank you for that question, not for your service. I think if there is a problem, it's probably in the depiction you just made, the difference between civilian and somebody from the service. And the moment there's that gap, it becomes unequal. And that's where the problem lies. And so during this, creating this show that you talked about, we talked to a lot of veterans and we did a lot of research. And yes, there are those who find that lip service and kind of creating a situation whereby 5 words you can do away with mutual caring. But I find that this society is problematic in that sense. I do come from Israel. There is no gap between the person welcoming a soldier back home and the soldier. The person, everybody goes to the military for better or for worse in the sense of how it's used. I'm not getting into the politics of it. But in terms of the tribal connection of a society, they're together. There's a togetherness, there's a oneness. And also there's a perceived justification for whatever military action is usually at stake. And so, and furthermore, it's close to home. And everybody knows where home is. Home is behind us. The enemy is in front of us. We know where we are. More and more American wars happen for justifications that are getting harder to believe in terms of national security, certainly, farther away and isolated within the enemy territory. So enemy is 360 around. There's no sense of belonging, no sense of where we are. And so when somebody comes back from those experiences and tries, and they represent 15% of the society, including all of their clout, their friends, their families, they become shadows among the majority, which have no idea, as you said, about what's going on. And so when somebody says, thank you for your service, a lot of soldiers say, just say, welcome home. But that concept of home itself is also questionable.
Right. Just say thank you. I used to, during the, from 2001 and 2003, one of the reasons thank you for your service evolved as this, the thing to communicate in this interaction between the civilians and the military is that all the commercial airports here for 14 years in America have been filled with guys and women in camouflage and with their rucksacks, and they're going overseas. That the military uses commercial flights to get them there. So we've all been interacting, and at the smoking lounge at the Atlanta airport for those first 2 years, 2001 to 2003, there was no war in Iraq then. There was just a war in Afghanistan. And I did say to the servicemen who I was sitting and smoking with, thank you for your service. But I had to stop saying that and start thinking about what I wanted to say to military personnel when I encountered them once the Iraq war started, because that wasn't something I wanted to thank them for. There's another level there where I appreciate what's going on. When I asked a friend of mine in the Special Forces, a colonel in the Special Forces who's right now stationed at Guantanamo Bay, what might you add to this question I just asked Ami? What's problematic about the expression, thank you for your service? That colonel in the Special Forces wrote back this. Ask them, what happens if you replace the words, your service, thank you for your service, with the words, killing those people for me. Thank you for killing those people for me. You want to say that? That's what we paid them to do.
I think one of the other reasons that it's a difficult phrase is that it's become pretty well worn, and maybe sometimes people resort to it because they don't know what else to say.
Right.
And so it's covering up an omission, a lack of knowledge, and it can feel inauthentic. And the division between the military and civilian societies has gotten so big that we have so many of those moments now.
Right.
Something that comes to mind around this. So I wrote this novel that's based on the little-known still phenomenon of women during the American Civil War who disguised themselves as men and went to fight, and they did so by the hundreds. and thinking about what it would mean to return from service, this kind of service, and resume your identity. It's not something you can talk about. There wasn't even any opportunity, right, to be thanked for said service for these women, in most cases. In one instance, a young woman named Jenny Hodgers, young Irish immigrant, 17 years old, immediately enlisted. She arrived just at the outbreak of the Civil War, immediately enlisted with the Union Army and fought through the 4 years of the war in disguise as Albert Cashiers, and never went back to being Jenny again until about 55 years later, Albert was hospitalized and Albert's gender was discovered. And Albert was immediately told to become Jenny again after 55 years. And Albert's pension was stripped, the government pension that he had been drawing for all of these years. And very interestingly in this case, it was Albert's fellow comrades, the ones still alive those many years later, who heard of this because it made the news, who stepped forward and said, this was the bravest of us, this was the most stalwart, this is the person more than any of us who deserves to have this pension. So in a sense, Albert was being thanked by his former comrades, and the pension was restored. Extraordinary story.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, the research and the work, and then the alchemic transformation that you've given it in your fiction and your art. So admire that. But if you can't think of something else to say rather than thank you, I still think you have to spend a little bit of brain power asking yourself what exactly you're thanking them for. You certainly don't want your children, your brothers, your parents, your whoever, your friends dying for you, but as a country, that's exactly what we've asked them to do. And if that's what we're thanking for, thank you for being willing to die for me. Okay, I suppose we should say that. But it's more complex than that. Just say stay safe if you love them. I actually, and I don't know about the rest of you, Helen and I have been very involved as journalists with the military. Ari himself was in the Israeli army, and Laird, you certainly thought about these issues enough. I don't really have a problem with the military per se. I've got a problem with civilians. I've got a problem with you and us. We're civilians too, because we are the ones who send people to war. You know, I'm friends with the speechwriter for the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. And in 2003, the speechwriter told me the Pentagon was shocked. First, that Bush was going to have them invade Iraq. Second, they were shocked that the American people weren't out in the streets saying, no way. The Pentagon was shocked that we didn't do that, because the Pentagon knew from the beginning what a mistake it was.
Bob, you had asked each of us to be prepared to read a passage from our books.
Please go ahead.
And I feel like, I don't know what order we want to go in, but I have a passage that relates to this. You were pointing out, I think, the tiredness or the exhaustion that people feel with the subject of war, and I think it's very, very hard, therefore, for people to think about the subject today or to engage with it unless they have firsthand experience. And when I was thinking of what I could write about that might somehow surprise people into being willing to think about war again when they're so tired of it, that was sort of partly how I wound up writing about women, because I think their experiences are more unfamiliar. So I'll just read a little bit about a woman named Desma Brooks who has 3 children, and she's a single mother, and she's on her 2nd year-long deployment. Iraq, dust, heat, unremitting loneliness. The soldiers who belonged to the 113th Support Battalion had been sundered from one another and sent to different places and were now living far apart on other bases. Desma and Charity had each other. That's what Desma thought in the beginning. The two of them lived inside a containerized housing unit called a CHU, basically half a connex, or a shipping container. The CHU was 8 feet wide and 40 feet long, and they had 20 feet of its length. A wall separated Desma and Charity from the two male soldiers who inhabited the other end of the same shipping container. The result was something like a trailer without indoor plumbing. They did not hang anything on the walls of the CHU. Inside her wall locker, though, Desma taped several pictures of her children. One showed Alexis and Paige playing on a swing set at the park. Another showed Paige lying down with a large plastic car on her belly, as if she'd gotten run over by the toy. And then there was Alexis with a close friend and Josh's 8th grade school picture. Desma knew when she opened the locker, she would see the children. And yet it still knocked her sideways to see their faces. She didn't carry any pictures with her when she left the post because looking at images of her children when she was on a mission made her feel physically sick.
Okay, so that, unless anybody, you guys want to say anything right now? I'll go on.
I just wanted to say regarding the things that you were saying earlier, I think we should not put all the blame on the soldiers coming back for the political policies behind their, so when you see a soldier and you say thank you. David Finkel wrote The Good Soldier.
Which is a great book.
A great book. And the follow-up is called Thank You for Your Service. Right. And when asked, he said, there's no cynicism about it. That's what I feel towards these men and women who are, sacrificing their years and putting themselves at risk for it, whether they know it or not. They think that they're representing our best interests in their countries. And so...
Right, and I don't want to tamper with the non-cynical nature of a sincere expression of gratitude. I don't want to tamper with that.
And also not to kind of blame the soldier for the, for the outcome of shooting somebody, of not shooting,
Soldiers never decide that they're going to war. Politicians decide that the soldiers are going to war, and we elect the politicians that make those decisions. That's the chain of command.
And so the things that you were saying about wanting to say to the soldier, maybe we should say that as civilians, maybe our dealings should be more with the politicians and our representatives and our peers as we go to elections, to decide what we're going to vote for.
Yes, in the hierarchy of gratitude and thankfulness, do we say to Dick Cheney, thank you for your service? No, we say, get your ass to The Hague for war crimes. You bastard. Okay. And if you have a different opinion of Dick Cheney, that's fine. There's mine.
Good.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Helen a question now. And I'm going to precede it with this email I got from Elliot Ackerman, who's a friend of mine. His first novel just came out called Green on Blue. It came out this summer. And Elliot was a Marine sniper during the Second Battle of Fallujah, and after his couple years in the Marines were up and he was back from Iraq in the States, he joined the CIA and became a CIA paramilitary assassin in Afghanistan. Now, okay, that's what we're paying people to do. Elliot's a great guy, I have to tell you, but that's his resume. And this is something that I asked him to write for me about PTSD. Because Elliot's one of those alpha dogs where most people in the military don't have PTSD, and the ones who don't sometimes don't look very kindly at the syndrome. They do with trauma. Oh, you got blown up, man. I know now you're really fucked up and you got PTSD. But the ones that are just psychological PTSD, bad nightmares, depression, things like that, it's not always the guys, the real gung-ho guys in the military are not always kind to them. Anyways, here's what Elliot had to say. Dreams, an intense weight of sadness, these manifestations of our wartime experience could surely be classified as PTSD. But the more insidious form of PTSD is the rootlessness associated with giving up the war. To be happy, one must have a sense of purpose. Let's say a man works a job. That job supports his family. It allows him to save a bit of money. The family grows with his savings. They go to the university. His children have a better life than him. He is valued. He has a purpose. From that purpose, he finds happiness. For a young person who goes off to war, they have a formative adult experience that gives them a very different and intense relationship with purpose. Let's say they're fighting in a valley or at a desert outpost or in an urban hellhole. The details don't really matter. They've got a mission, the same as the other soldiers that more often than not they form very close relationships with. This soldier fights for the mission, but also to protect his best friends. This is a very potent type of purpose. If purpose is the drug that induces happiness, there is no stronger dose than the wartime experience. The soldier leaves home at a young age and begins to take the strongest drug, in effect freebasing the crystal meth of purpose. But eventually the war ends, the soldier returns home. He must reintegrate into society, find his happiness, find a new purpose. He looks at what's available. Maybe it's not a job at Home Depot. Maybe it's a job at Home Depot, going to college, working in real estate. Nothing compares to what he's just done. He looks around and his world is no longer crystal meth. His world is Coors Light. A certain depression sets in, the knowledge that the rest of his life will be sitting on his front porch, sipping Coors Light, watching his life pass by. The emotional arc isn't unique to the veteran professional athletes, artists with great early success. Anyone who's viewed the peak must reckon with the descent. So
I hate to interrupt here, sorry, excuse me.
That wasn't
We've got
really
5 minutes until we start the Q&A, so we just want to let the other panelists read their excerpts.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the
you.
lead into that was actually not a monologue. That was reading an excerpt from somebody else's thing. So Helen, you know what I'm going to ask you. This idea of reverse culture shock. It's harder to come home sometimes than it is to deploy into another culture.
And I think you've already really adequately described the main reason that it's so hard for people in terms of lacking that same sense of purpose that they found in the military. And the only thing I would add to that is that the military and the civilian worlds are increasingly disparate in terms of the language that they speak. And so particularly somebody in the National Guard, like the women that I was writing about, when they come home, they're speaking the military language now. They lived in a CHU. What's that? That's a Connex. And then they try and explain their experiences to people that they just had on a deployment to people at home, and they're not speaking the same language. The people at home are saying, what's a CHU? They're using all these acronyms, and that's all I would add. I think, were you going to read excerpts as well?
Wait, is it over?
No, not yet.
Okay. Do you want to read, Laird, or do you want me to ask you the question about Neverhome?
Well, maybe that it is a good lead, and I'm actually going to read a small portion of a letter written by one of these women who did this. So this is not Jenny Hodges. This is a woman whose name was Sarah Rosetta Wakeman, who went to war and fought for 2 years and then never went home. She never made it home. She died of disease after seeing significant combat, as so many soldiers did. But she wrote a series of letters, and I want to give you just a little taste of the language because it speaks to this notion of return, the desire for return, and then knowing, as we do, that Sarah Wakeman never made it home, which was such an important notion for me in formulating this book that I wrote. This is July 27th, 1863, and I'm going to excerpt. Dear Mother, I am in hopes that this war will soon be over so that I can come home once more in this world. Write soon as you get this letter and let me know if you have sent Robert likeness or not and where it was direct. I send you $1 in this to you to buy snuff with. I use a good deal of tobacco. I have what money I ought to use and send some home to you, but I spend more money here than I would if I was home. I have sent $60 in money home, but there was $5 that you never got. I have sent $55 that you have got, and if I live, I will send all the money I can spare. So goodbye for this time. So you can see that I think as much of you and the rest of the family as I ever did, and if I ever live to come home, I will do as much for you as I ever did. Write soon as you get this letter, and let me know all about what is going on there. Please let me know. So goodbye for this time. Direct you letter to Washington, D.C., Rosetta Wakeman. And then I'll just offer a poem that was sort of instrumental to me in coming up with the title of the novel, thinking about Sarah Wakeman, this desire to return home, never making it home. This is a poem that a friend of mine named Michael Bradfute wrote 20-some years ago. And it goes like this: "Then death, the end of nothing, takes, when fields, when rust, when oranges, within a naked lover grow. The Neverhome arrives just briefly, then is far again." So this notion of something, of a place that becomes a kind of entity that's illusory, that vanishes, and that in some cases is never grasped at all.
Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. We can go to Q&A right now, or we can have me just blather more and eat up everybody's time, or you guys can say something. Pardon me? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to talk anymore, honestly.
We're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that our venue manager, Jen, is a wonderful actress, and I asked for her to read a piece that I wrote because it's written for somebody just like her.
If only he gets blown up already. He's trying so hard. He volunteered for the last 2 deployments. He sits through nights with a gun in his mouth down in the basement. He's begging for it. Daisy and Jax can have a hero dad instead of... And it would be so much easier for me. I get that 100K oops money from the government. I could finally leave this hellhole and have a life. Everybody happy. Only about 1/4 of the guys exposed to similar situations get mentally screwed up. Others make it through. Hurt, affected, sure. But they don't have flashbacks. They don't have reoccurring nightmares. They don't mistake a random bag left at the sidewalk for a bomb. You know, Ted pulled a gun on a cop. It was a beautiful Sunday. We're all out for a drive, Daisy and Jax in the back, Ted at the wheel. All of a sudden, there's this unmarked police car at the side of the road, and this cop is in it. And he's aiming a gun at us. Now, it was only a speed gun, but for Ted, it was like an insurgent out to shoot his family. I mean, Ted pulled a gun on a cop in front of the kids, and I'm pregnant. Whew.
You know, I had no idea that he had prepared something to be read there, so you don't...
15 minutes before
Pardon me?
Jen, 15 minutes before the panel, Jen kind of came to mind.
No, it's fine. It's just that I was getting something.
That was fantastic. It brought it all together. That was the perfect.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So we're more than willing to take questions. Yes, sir.
I haven't read of PTSD in women soldiers. Is it as prevalent, does it appear as frequently in women soldiers as it does men?
PTSD is the #1 complaint among women showing up at the VA today. And the question of whether it's equally prevalent in the 2 genders is being studied, and there are many papers being written on it. And I would say, from my experience of reading those, it is showing up roughly equal. Sometimes men may be more prone to PTSD and women may be more prone to depression is one theory that I've seen. So there's not total agreement.
God, what's the science there between the 2? I mean, do you know anything about the science between PTSD and depression?
So PTSD and depression is the #2 complaint among women showing up. So they are being categorized differently, although I actually believe they're interrelated.
Yeah.
So what I understand, the biggest predictor of PTSD and also depression and certainly suicide among people who've served, suicide for certain, the biggest predictor of how many and who will try to commit suicide after service is the ones who have tried before.
Yeah,
and the homes that they've
yeah.
left before, and the community that they've had before, and their mental stability before they went out to service and to the...
Yeah, and the question of whether they experienced trauma in childhood, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
I have another question here.
It was, when I add to this response, I was talking to a group of soldiers, again, trying to prepare for this a panel of ours, and they said, look, Bob, if somebody is dysfunctional before they ever go into the military, if they have a problem with social integration before they ever go into the military, then they're deployed, they experience trauma. Of course, when they come out of the military, they're still the same dysfunctional person who has trouble socially integrating, and now they have trauma attached to it. But you know, you go in and come out in somewhat the same person, right?
Well, also you've just had the high that you referenced earlier of combat experience and of life and death situation, and of being dependent among those who are with you, codependent in a group, and now you're back home to a pretty isolated society, and you have to make it make it on your own. And you have very little capacity to talk about this with your wife. You're used to sleep around a lot of people who are guarding you literally with arms, and now you're alone. So it's really a return to a new place that is not very much like home. It doesn't breathe of safety.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I've got one right here.
Thank you very much for the panel. I think you brought up an interesting question. I kind of grew up in a country where there was an 8-year war, ongoing war in the Middle East, and let me tell you, the experience of living there was very different from the experience of living here. I mean, the war in the Middle East is not affecting even the price of bread on a daily basis here, let alone, like, there's no shrapnels, there's no bombs coming. So, of course, it's natural to have that disconnect between the reality of war and living kind of comfortably here. So I wonder, given that disconnect, when are we going to be tired of this narrative of necessity of war? Is war really necessary? Like, given all the knowledge and all the culture that we've been kind of talking about in the last couple of days, do we still really think that war is necessary? Maybe it is, but I think every person has to really sit down and think about it, of the price of war that's being paid every day, where people are kind of facing those bombs and those fire, and ask ourselves this question in a very immediate way, rather than as something abstract that's on a TV screen.
You've answered your own question.
Yeah, I think that was a wonderful comment.
Yes, it was a great comment. And if you've been watching the Republican debates, what do you think our chances are of having a Republican president who's not going to start another war?
Okay, I've got another question here.
I just want to mention that this Sunday New York Times this morning's cover story was about, did you read that?
Right.
About 13 men from the same Marine battalion that had committed suicide. And a lot of the survivors were talking about the lack of support that they get when they come home. And also, once one person commits suicide, the others, it opens it up to the possibility. I would just love to hear your thoughts and comments on that.
The only thing I would add, and that it is an amazing story, is that there are, if you look at women between the ages of 20 and 30 with military experience, their rate of suicide is 12 times that of women without military experience who are the same age. So women are also committing suicide, even though it's thought of as a very male trend.
Okay, I've got one back here, and this will be the final question.
I don't think we're going to have a Nuremberg trials again in the world, ever. We have The Hague, and we have the spectacles of drones and assassinations daily. And sometimes, like after 9/11, when we had Hillary Clinton said that she had to cough when she was in the command room after they went after bin Laden, I don't believe that she had to cough. I think she was watching an assassination. No matter how justified in the terrible sacrifice of 9/11, we had a state engaging in assassination of another enemy of the state, dead as an enemy of the state. So if we're not going to have any sense of justice beyond the immediate moment, who gets who, and then we're still at this, as the gentleman just said, the world is at this level of destruction, and there's no sense of justice, societal justice, individual justice, no Nuremberg, no sense of honor or integrity, even if one has been so full of courage and heroism, which does happen in war. My father was a World War II veteran. So it's not a question, it's just a wondering, where do we get that back to the human identity apart from killing each other?
I heard a conversation earlier this morning, and a panelist said that her religion is feminism. And maybe when that wave comes to fruition, we will get to that place. And that responds to your question as well, inshallah.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something. So we're still gathering up the last Nazis. And without any justice, without a sense of justice in the world, you get what we have right now, which is a lot of vengeance going on, because vengeance is the only response to a lack of justice. You can't get justice, you can't get justice, you can't get justice, and finally you seek vengeance. I'm writing, my next novel is about the dirty war in Argentina, and just now, those filthy people who disappeared 30,000 young people, college students and labor union organizers and babies in Argentina in the late 70s and early 80s, 30 years ago. Just now, trials have started. So we can always hope, but there's never hope if somebody walks away from the pursuit of justice, if a society walks away from it. And the whole society has to pursue it, or it doesn't work.
Okay, on that note, we're out of time. I would like to thank our panel, Helen Thorpe, Laird Hunt, Dayan, and Bob Shacochis.